Hello and welcome to History by Hollywood, a podcast series that examines the real events and people behind fact-based movies. This is episode 70.1 for Sunday the 16th of February, and this week's movie is The Social Network, the story of the genesis of Facebook, starring Jesse Eisenberg in the lead role as Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg. Zuckerberg would go on to be the youngest ever self-made billionaire, aged only 23, although Forbes' rich list now claims that Kylie Jenner of the extended Kardashian-Jenner clan has beaten that achievement, making her first billion by the age of 21, although considering the family she comes from, I'd question the application of the prefix self-made, but who am I to argue with Forbes? Actually, that's a good point. Who am I? My name is Martin Darlington, and this week I'm not being joined by Andrew, who is moving house, and when that happens in Australia, it can, and in this case does, involve a move that in Europe would see you crossing continents, over 1,000 miles. But I'll let Andrew tell you all about that when he comes back on the next show, which will now be Denial. I'll get to those details later. However, don't worry, you're not going to be having my voice alone inflicted upon you, because when we get to covering the main body of the show, I will be joined by Californian-based software engineer, composer of the HBH theme tune, The Waltz of Anachronism, and most importantly, dear friend of mine, Jules Chisek. Now, Jules introduced me to the world of podcasts first as a listener to him and the late lamented Jim Race on MotoGP OD, which evolved to become Motopod shortly after they recruited me to join as a co-host, and that's where I cut my podcasting teeth. So, in updates and errata, Jules and I have already had a go at recording, but there was a mysterious echo on both the Skype line and the recording at his end. Now, we record offline, so we can't blame Skype for that. So this week's episode, whilst Jules fixes that, is limited to me going through the intro, the listener feedback and the story of the movie, although fret not, dear listener, as I have some really interesting padding. Did I say padding? I mean information to add to the story of the movie that isn't strictly to do with Facebook or the social network, but we think you'll like it as it adds colour, depth and context to some of what happens in the movie. For those who are paying attention to the website, and I've already referenced it with the bringing forward of Denial, you'll have noticed that the next planned episode, Midway, has been removed from the web page. Now, this is only because I realised that our episode was due out the day before the movie became available to legally stream. This seemed a little bit premature. So don't worry, we will be covering Midway probably in a couple of months' time. So Denial has been brought forward to the 1st of March, or if Social Network takes more than 2 weeks, maybe the 8th of March. And Ford versus Ferrari has also moved a corresponding amount forward. Beyond Ford versus Ferrari, we are in keen and furious discussion to thrash out the future episodes beyond the early spring, as we always fear a stiffly worded email from Gary Shavit if we don't have at least 3 future episodes listed so he can do his homework. Only kidding, Gaza. And just a reminder for those who catch the HBH dosage on YouTube, I'm afraid it will be a music-free version for you guys, apart from Jules' creation, as that's original and he really doesn't mind. Sorry about that. Blame the greedy music corporations who make little folk like me file a fair usage application, which I'm told can take weeks to get approval. And to be honest, we don't plan that far ahead on the details. So for the sake of incidental music, it ain't worth the candle. In news and reviews, we do have a review. I'll get to that in a moment. But first of all, a massive thank you to David Pomerantz, younger brother to Dr. Phil, who those of this parish will be very aware of. David has joined the family, and he's, as in the HBH family, obviously he's already in the Pomerantz family, I guess since birth. Sorry about the clattering and banging. I've got 7 cats, at least one of whom is always misbehaving. David has given us a very generous donation, which is hugely appreciated. In fact, this show is pretty much being propped up financially by the Pomerantz family, supported by our lovely friend and his second mention of the show, Gary Shavit. So a huge thank you and a well done to Mrs. Pomerantz, who correctly identified the Stevie Wonder song at the beginning of Frost Nixon Part 2 as Feel It All Over. Although we used the clip under the title Sir Duke, his tribute to Duke Ellington. Why the same song opening exists under different titles, I have no idea, and I should have researched. But life needs its little mysteries, so that one I'm just going to leave hanging out there in the ether. And this would be an appropriate time to announce our winner of Absolutely Nothing. That's the prize, by the way, not the name of the competition, was Elizabeth Booth. Elizabeth wrote in using the title that we'd found it under, saying, yeah, it was Stevie Wonder, Sir Duke, and then she added, keep up the good work. Which I'd like to assure you, Elizabeth, and everybody else, we will do our very best too. So thank you so much for contributing. And yes, you are the winner of, nothing. But yay! David P., which is David Pomerantz, also gave us an iTunes review. And I do like this, and you'll find out why at the end of the review. It's entitled, You Don't Have to Be a History Buff. 5 stars from Apple Podcasts, and he continues, you simply have to love movies. Martin and Andrew are insightful and entertaining. The wealth of detail on historical events flows by effortlessly. It's not a chat fest. It's a friendly but focused discussion of a movie's strengths and over the backdrop of thorough research where they often bring in other experts to lend in-depth knowledge. I've returned to more than a few movies with fresh eyes to watch scenes whose subtle quality had eluded me the first time around. The Post, Catch Me If You Can, Apollo 13, The Battle of Britain, amongst others. 10 stars if I could. Brilliant. P.S. I downloaded iTunes on my PC just to write this review. I've been listening long enough that they deserve at least that. That's remarkable. I know some people do have issues with Apple and iTunes. I have issues with Apple, even though I use their products and I do use iTunes. Yeah, no, that's great. That someone's actually downloaded iTunes purely to be able to leave a review. So thank you very much, David. We are humbled and we will strive as hard as we can to maintain the standards that have entertained you. Now, listener feedback. There's some really, really good stuff that's come in. We heard from Mark Dupre. Now, Mark is, it's a slightly abridged version of his email, but he said, guys, you combine 2 of my great interests. I'm a film producer at Rochester Institute of Technology, and my dad was a history teacher, so your podcast was a hit as soon as I came across it. You have a great deal of knowledge about film, but you never try to act like super experts, which is so refreshing. And I'm just going to add there, realistic, because we're definitely not super experts. You are clear about what you like and don't, and you make it clear you're more history expert than film expert, and that's refreshing for someone who listens to a lot of film podcasts. Open parenthesis, some podcast folks are quite confident about expressing half-assed opinions, and you never do that. Thanks. Close parenthesis. Mark then goes on, he has one slight correction for us that I think we must have said in Reversal of Fortune that Jeremy Irons won the Best Supporting Actor, whereas of course it was in fact the Best Actor Academy Award. So apologies for that slip. Now, fascinatingly, and we were quite taken aback when we got this email from Mark, we're like, oh no, we've got an industry expert, we've got a professor of film. We're really going to have to up our game. Mark's made a very good point. You know how we often talk, especially in the story of the movie, how much the movie made, how much it cost to make, and we say, wow, so, for example, Kenneth Branagh's Henry V, I think it cost 9 million and it raked in 12. So it's like, or 10, whatever it was. It's a modest success. Mark makes, and when you think about it, the kind of obvious point, and I'm really sorry if I'm doing a Dr. Watson to Mark Dupre's Sherlock Holmes of once he explains why, you go, oh yeah, that's really obvious. Well, it clearly wasn't obvious before because we weren't aware of it. Mark makes the point that the production costs do not include marketing, advertising and distribution. Once you take those into account, and he makes the point, marketing varies, but it can be up to half the production cost or more. So a film that costs 10 million to make and takes in 14 million is likely to be a big money loser overall. He also points out that Hollywood is known for its creative accounting, but he's aware of some films where the associated costs are as much or more than the production costs themselves. He recently read an expert considers a film breaking even if they get at least 2.5 times the profit over original production costs. He goes on to say, I love both the accents and the non-American perspectives. I have British and Aussie friends, so I do enjoy hearing you both. And whilst I love my country, I also love hearing non-judgmental alternative perspectives on films and history. So thank you for all your hard work. In my dream world, we'd all have coffee someday. Well, Mark, I'm not exactly sure where Rochester is. It sounds New England-y to me. I'll have to look it up. Again, research. Terrible. You're probably going to leave the podcast now in disgust. that we don't actually know where Rochester is. But when Sharon and I go on our massive tour of America, which has been planned for about 10 years, and it hasn't happened yet, we will drop by and have coffee. That would be lovely. Neither of us drink tea. Very un-British of us. Now, Mark has a website, www.film-prof, as in prof.com. We will put a link in the website. Mark does analysis rather than simply reviews, and he's covered all sorts of films, older films as well as newer ones. And as we'll come on to shortly, a mention of 1917. The most recent I read when I looked at his website was 1917, and it was a very, very insightful, not a review, it's more an analysis. There's no judgment there, it's just looking at different aspects. So absolutely fascinating. So the film buffs amongst you, go onto the website, go to the bottom of any of the pages, you'll find the blue links. Social Network 70.1 or Social Network Part 1 will be the top one for this next week. Click on that and scroll down and you'll find the images and anything else from the film that we link to. And in this case, definitely Mark Dupre's website. So Mark, thank you so much, Professor, and glad to have you on board. That's right, Mark sent me another example. The recent Marvel Comics, DC Comics, whatever it is, the Birds of Prey movie, has earned a worldwide total of $79 million so far against a reported $82 million budget. So you're like, wow, big budget, but yeah, it's bringing it in, so that should easily get over the profitability mark. And then he points out that it's estimated the film will need to gross $250 to $300 million worldwide to break even. Considering it has been out for a little while, I suspect that is going to be a loss leader. But hey, I'm glad there are people who make films that they know are going to struggle, and in return they make the studio, like George Clooney has this deal where he makes 2 or 3 blockbusters, brings all the money in, and then they allow him to go and do a Syriana or a Good Night and Good Luck. So all power to his elbow. So we did hear, naturally, from Dr. Phil Pomerantz. He wrote in regarding 1917, which he'd been to see, and he absolutely loved it. Now, I've seen it, and I possibly erred in choosing an IMAX theatre to see it in. Due to the immersive one long shot camera technique and the Private Ryan-esque jerkiness when fast movement or panning is involved, I ended up with mild motion sickness, which seems strange possibly for a helicopter pilot, but I really didn't enjoy the experience, not the physical experience anyway. My mistake, no doubt, and it is definitely a movie to watch. It is fascinating from a cinematographical point of view, but the story is good. That sounds like I'm damning it with faint praise, and I probably am a bit. I wasn't completely wowed, but that might have been because I was feeling a bit queasy. For HBH inclusion, however, to further reference Private Ryan, this one's even less suitable for us to cover, as it's a purely fictional story, and in this case set on a very loosely historical background. It's in 1917, somewhere on the Western Front. I do join, however, with Dr. Phil in urging you all to see it. It is a very different kind of war movie. Just don't go to an IMAX unless you have a cast iron constitution. Phil also reminded us regarding Frost Nixon that Nixon did do some good work and should be viewed in balance. The creation of the Environmental Protection Agency and recognising the People's Republic of China often being overlooked in favour of the stop-at-nothing crook and bigot view that is most common today. So that's certainly a good nudge for some balance. We also heard from Matthew Newton. Matthew was very kind about the show and mentioned that during the Mrs. Brown episode, all that time ago, goodness me, last year before, I can't remember now, we talked about covering Legend, the Tom Hardy movie about the Cray twins, the 1960s London criminals. We did intend to cover it until we did a bit of research and learned that apart from Tom Hardy's acting skills, which are profound, there's really not that much in the way of a good film to get your teeth into. We'll come on to a little bit later about audience and critic scores. I mean, you already know that we're tending towards ignoring the critic scores and just concentrating on audience ones. But now it's not that we won't ever consider returning to it, but there are so many really good movies about fascinating historical events or people that it's way down the list, to be honest. I know there is a fascination with the Krays. part of me, and this is why Andrew and I would still both like to cover The Highwayman, which is another movie with poor reviews, because it approaches Bonnie and Clyde without making Bonnie and Clyde the main focus. It makes their crimes and the efforts to catch them the main focus. This habit of glamorizing violent criminals, we see it in Peaky Blinders, The Sopranos, which I watched, and I was rooting for Tony Soprano as much as the next man. It's something that I think, if we're going to try and take an accurate look at movies and how they reflect history, I'm not sure that a movie that glamorizes, it may not do, I haven't seen Legend, but that certainly promotes the story of the craze is something that we want to do, unless it has something interesting to say. I haven't seen it. Thank you for the email though, Matthew. And he went on to say that Matthew was in Qatar 30 years ago as part of a team commissioning Hamad Hospital, and he asked if it was still going. It most certainly is, or the same name is, because I believe it was fairly recently refurbished, if not totally rebuilt. And it is said to be an excellent facility, which I'm glad to say I have not yet had the need to use. Now, on movies we should cover, Christina Dogstarter wrote in. Before I get to the substance of Christina's email, I should point out, for some weird reason, my email provider, British Telecom, suddenly decided that her emails constituted spam. She asked me on Twitter if I'd received any recent emails, because normally we're pretty good at returning or replying to emails within a day or two. And I said no, so I had a look, and there they all were. Despite me repeatedly marking them not spam, they persisted in this, along with the podcast review notification service we use. So it's thanks to Christina that I found David's review this week, Qatar Airways flight notifications, and other valuable emails. So I've written to BT asking why this has all happened all of a sudden, and please let me decide what is and isn't spam. Grr. So I'm kind of annoyed by that. But thank you for persisting, Christina. If anybody thinks, if you've sent us an email, we haven't replied, it may well be that it has gone into the spam folder. I'm now getting pretty good at checking it every day or two. But you can get us on Facebook at facebook.com/history by Hollywood, or via Twitter. We are at History by H Wood, all one word, H, just the letter H and then Wood. Obviously, don't email us to say you haven't replied to my email, because we're not getting your emails. Or we might have honestly missed it. And when I say we, it's actually me. The way that WordPress sets up, we've got hosts at historybyhollywood.com, but that just comes to me, and then I forward them to Andrew, or I CC him in into a reply so he can join the conversation. Now, Christina, in the light of Frost Nixon, she asked if we'd consider covering Vice, the biopic about Dick Cheney starring Christian Bale in the lead role. Now, we looked at it when it first came out, and I do remember noticing the critic score was very low. I don't care. It was for Bohemian Rhapsody, which I thought was a brilliant film. It is for Midway, which I haven't seen yet, but people who have seen it have said it's really, really good. So it already critic scored, but Vice got panned on audience scores as well. Christina points out, treat that with a little bit of caution. It may be because it is a movie that makes you really angry about some of the stuff that Dick Cheney thought was acceptable to get up to, which is where the parallel to Nixon comes in. And yet Cheney's been a serial survivor. She assures us it's worthy of an episode. Christina has a very impressive track record of recommendations, so we will definitely look again, maybe actually watch it, which should really be the first port of call, you'd think. But we're also keen to hear anyone else's thoughts. So we'll have a little bit of a break from politics of a few episodes, but if we do come back, it would give us a bit of a link to Frost Nixon, in the same way that, like I say, we still want to do The Highwayman. We might actually drop that in quite soon, look at the Bonnie and Clyde thing. We'd also like to come back to the civil rights movies, because there's still a bunch of those that we'd like to film, that's specifically the American civil rights movement. We have various themes. Anyway, before we go on, one final point. Very good friend of the show, Sean Munger, doctor, professor, lawyer, when I say doctor, academic doctor, historian, author, podcaster, the host of the Second Decade podcast, and he's been guested with us now on The Right Stuff, Okay, I've got a cat that keeps jumping up where... Right, Colin, off the table. Lie down. Right, stay. Don't do it again. He's a cat. He has no idea what I'm talking about. This is a mildly disabled cat who's healthy and happy and very affectionate. But he does like to get involved in everything. And, oh no, here we go. No, go away. I'm talking to the listeners. Curl up your sister. There you go, good boy. People are really going to become convinced he's just padding out this episode to last a week. And you're absolutely right. Anyway, what was I saying? Yeah, Sean Munger. He co-hosted on The Right Stuff and, of course, on Reversal of Fortune. He hosts the Second Decade podcast. I know some of you have got involved listening to that. It's great. And now, along with husband Cody, and together they've just launched a new podcast series called Green Screen. Now, this is going to be looking at movies that have an environmental element or discuss climate change or have some kind of environmental background or story theme. And having listened to the first episode, what I can say, it is not in any way preachy. It's not dull. As soon as someone tells me, oh, there's someone who's passionate about, climate change and environmental issues, however valid and correct it is for us to be concerned and to discuss these things, I just think, oh, okay, this person's going to be dull. But any of you who've listened to Sean before, who've heard him on our show, listened to him on his show, will know there's a great humour to him. It's a light touch without losing sight of the direction and the passion. It's really well done. And obviously Cody and Sean bounce off each other wonderfully. They've got one episode out so far, and it is The China Syndrome. This was the 1979 eco-thriller. And to give you a hint of the flavour of the show, the notes on the first episode says, nuclear power, NIMBYism and pressurised turtle pee are the hot button issues on the table as we discuss this 1979 eco-thriller. So just to give those people a background, The China Syndrome was about a nuclear power plant visited by a Jane Fonda's character who's a reporter. She wants to do serious stories. Her sexist bosses keep sending her off on to do fluffy stories. And she gets a chance, along with Michael Douglas, I think is in it, to investigate this or to do a story about this nuclear power plant. And whilst they're there, there's a near meltdown. And it was very prescient because within months of the release, or days of the release of the movie, 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania nearly went into meltdown, which effectively killed the nuclear power industry in the United States. It's debatable whether you think it's clean or it's not. There's no emissions, but you do have to get rid of the nuclear waste at the end. And I used to think, we'll just send it into space. But apparently, sending it into space, it costs like twice as much energy as you would have extracted from that nuclear waste. So it's kind of counterproductive. So, obviously it's a moot point, or it's a point for discussion whether nuclear power is a good thing or not. However, I can tell you Green Screen is a good thing. It's great. We'll also have a link to that on the iTunes version, but you can find it, I'm sure, through wherever you get your podcast from. Just put in Green Screen, 2 words, and find it and do support it. It's really good. And we may have some overlap. I mean, they're going to really look at movies with an environmental or climate change element. I keep saying to Sean, please do The Day After Tomorrow. I just want to know if there's any truth in it whatsoever. If anyone's seen it, basically the world turns into as an ice age, which comes in the space of about 18 hours. So, it's interesting. Anyway, without further ado, he says after 23 minutes and 45 seconds, let us go on and look at The Social Network. I think it was The Social Network we're doing this week. I've forgotten. And the story of the movie. Dum, 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 dum. All right, YouTubers. Just pour in a Guinness and we'll just talk amongst ourselves whilst we wait for those lucky people over on iTunes and Podbean and SoundCloud. They're just listening to some incidental music. Don't worry, you're not missing much. Missing much. And there we go. The Social Network, the story of the movie. Released in 2010, the movie cost $50 million to make, but by the end of its theatrical run had recouped $225 million worldwide, And in light of Mark Dupre's email, I think we can say that making 225 million worldwide does make it a success. Possibly not necessarily a huge commercial success. It all depends how much they spent on marketing. So it's going to be really difficult for us in the future to tell if a movie made money or not. And as Mark said, you can't even go deeper in like Hollywood accountants will just make it a success or not as they see fit, depending how they, I wouldn't say cook the books, massage the figures. It was directed by David Fincher and written by Aaron Sorkin. The movie starred Jesse Eisenberg as Mark Zuckerberg, the founder and CEO of Facebook, a post in which he remains to this day. Fincher had directed Fight Club, a very well received movie, and Sorkin was the main writer for US political series The West Wing. Their script and tight direction kept the movie down to a 2-hour length. The dialogue is sharp and brisk, and the characterizations of these very much alive and real people glaringly harsh in almost every case. I don't mean that in a negative sense as so much, but they really do show warts and all. Now, we'll get into whether those are accurate ones. Just a quick note on The West Wing. I cannot believe I've never watched that programme. So many friends have said, oh, you'd love it, you know, you like politics, you're interested in it, it's really good. I do like Martin Sheen, who I believe was the president in the early episodes. But there's something like 31 series each of however many episodes. I don't think I'm going to live long enough to watch it, so unfortunately I think that one's going to have to pass me by. Anyway, the movie, this is The Social Network, was nominated for a large number of awards, but the only Academy Awards it won were for Best Editing, Best Adapted Screenplay and Best Original Score. It lost out on the big three, as in picture, director and actor, to The King's Speech, which was featured in History by Hollywood's episode 47. The Golden Globes were kinder, awarding Social Network Best Picture in the Drama category, and it won Best Director plus the Screenplay and Original Score, whereas the BAFTAs followed the Oscars lead with just Best Editing and Screenplay, although director David Fincher did pick up the Best Director gong. The outdoor scenes of the movie, which are primarily set in Harvard's campus, actually used 2 Massachusetts prep schools and a college, Harvard College itself no longer allowing filming on its site. Now, director Fincher uses a back and forth timeline which somehow, a bit like Frost Nixon using the future interview clips, manages to be really clear without spoon feeding to the audience. It assumes a level of sophistication and sharpness of mind in its audience that is pretty flattering, but also well judged. I have watched films before that have left me completely baffled, and I've thought either I'm too stupid for this film or it's just been badly done. These are really, really well done. The main action is set in the recent past, and the scenes are linked and narrated by scenes from future legal hearings. But it is really, really effective. Rotten Tomatoes currently rates the movie at 96% from critics and 86% from audiences, both figures showing it to be a very well received and popular movie. Reaction amongst the protagonists has been mixed. Zuckerberg described the movie as having made up a lot that he found quite hurtful, but he accepted that the reality of writing code was incredibly dull and the movie aimed to entertain. He did also say they've absolutely nailed his wardrobe. He says pretty much every item of clothing you see Jesse Eisenberg wear, I own and did wear around that time. He made an interesting comment as well. He would buy multiple copies of the same shirt and the same sweatpants and the same flip-flops. The reason being that he didn't want to waste time trying to choose what to wear that day. He sort of sees it as fairly peripheral. So interesting insight into his frame of mind. The Winklevoss brothers seem to be delighted with their portrayal, surprisingly enough, saying that they thought the movie should have won Best Picture and they found it very entertaining. They did point out that the movie shows their conflict with Zuckerberg as them representing privilege and Zuckerberg the underdog, whereas in reality they were both from fairly similar backgrounds. They both went to very prestigious prep schools. And Mark Zuckerberg, interestingly, did row crew at his college, although not when he went to Harvard. Sorry, that's college in the British sense of school, high school. One article we found was quite interesting. It spoke to Harvard students about the movie shortly after it was shown on campus. Several said it definitely glamorized life at the prestigious college, but others felt it actually did an excellent job in highlighting Harvard's obsession with exclusivity. And they suggested that the drive behind, the motivation behind the ideas of such things as Facebook was the sex appeal of exclusivity. Screenwriter Alan Sorkin says the film is absolutely non-fiction, and then he qualified that statement to say, well, it's non-fiction about facts that are in dispute, and added, I don't want my fidelity to be to the truth, I want it to be to storytelling. So make of that what you will. Now, one element of the movie that we'll get to, but warrants addressing now, is about location. Zuckerberg will be repeatedly told that he has to move to California. Why, we might ask. So, Jules and I were having a back and forth recently discussing, topics and where we're going to go with it and how we're going to actually put this show together. And I recalled hearing something about this obsession with tech in California, and I somehow managed to conflate about 3 stories into one. So I had a bit of a dig, as is my wont, and what emerged was pretty fascinating given that our focus for this episode is technology and, of course, movies. So let me take you back to the days of Thomas Edison, celebrated inventor and American icon. Edison submitted thousands of patents, mainly during the very late 19th century, and for this he's rightly famous. However, less well known or less well publicised is that he charged very high fees for people using his inventions. He fiercely enforced these patent fees and was quite happy to use strong-arm tactics to do so. For this reason, early motion picture producers went west to California to avoid the crippling costs of paying Edison for the patents on a couple of essential pieces of camera equipment he had patented, and he did probably invent, under the umbrella of his Edison Film Trust, whose agent scoured the East Coast looking for patent infringements so he could either sue the companies or shut them down, or both. The movie moguls correctly calculated it would be uneconomical for him to pursue them to California, hence Hollywood being where it is. Well, okay, Hollywood's a district that probably would have been there anyway, but Hollywood in the sense of the movie industry. And the sunshine was probably quite attractive too. So that's one element, which I just found slightly satisfying. This view I'd sort of traditionally had that Thomas Edison was probably an Einstein-like, slightly mad professor, benevolent, giving the world his inventions for their betterment. Nah, apparently he was quite ruthless. Now, another one is about a chap called William Bradford Shotley. Now, he's growing up a generation or two after Edison. He was born and grew up in Palo Alto in the Santa Clara Valley, California. And those in the know will probably see where this is going already. It's the site of Stanford University, which was founded by a man called Stanford, who apparently was even worse than Edison. I mean, he was a proper Rockefeller in the sense of how he went about business, but he also had a philanthropic streak, and he founded Stanford University. William Bradley Shotley Jr. is best known as a co-inventor of the transistor, and he did great work during World War II for the US forces and the US war effort. But apparently, whilst a brilliant man, was also a very difficult man to work with. So after becoming one of 3 recipients of the Nobel Prize for the transistor invention in the early 1950s, he was basically let go. I think it was Bell Electronics he was working for at the time. So he decided to go home to Palo Alto, and he set up a small company to develop solid-state electronics. Solid state just means no moving parts, so it's a transistor as opposed to a valve in a radio, that sort of thing. Now, in the valley was Stanford University, who had by this stage opened an industrial estate on the hope that they could use work done in the university's technical department, pay for it, and therefore help fund the said department, or Caltech as it's better known today, the Californian Technical College Institute, possibly. So this is like the West Coast version of MIT, I suppose. Now, Shotley was such a horrible man with whom to work that his company suffered repeated defections as his lead researchers left to join other companies or set up their own. But due to their connections to Caltech, they invariably remained in the area. A number of these former colleagues of Shotley set up a company called Integrated Electronics. That became shortened, I know some of you are way ahead of me here, to Intel, and they made silicon chips. So if it wasn't for William Shotley being a brilliant electronics expert, but also a bit of a total arse, Santa Clara Valley, where he grew up and to where he retreated, wouldn't bear its modern, more common name, Silicon Valley. Boom! You see, it's all connected. So when we do cover a film that talks about William Shotley's life, I don't think that one's been made yet. There must be films about Edison. That would be interesting. I'm not aware of any. If there aren't any, then someone needs to make one. And I don't know. I think Christopher Walken should play him, but I suppose that would have to be later in life. Who could do a good young Thomas Edison? So you're looking for someone who's highly intelligent, ruthless, and potentially violent. I don't know. Anyway, I think I've probably spun this out long enough to justify a week's worth. I am so sorry. We've been a little bit behind the drag curve recently. We are working very hard to get ahead of it again. In between unpacking boxes and cats and dogs and helping his lovely wife Janine sorting the house out, Andrew is deep in research on Holocaust deniers and the like, hence the title of the next movie will be covering denial. But for now, I hope I've given you some food for thought. If anyone hasn't seen The Social Network, you don't have to use Facebook to get it. Trust me. I know there are a number of people who are wonderfully free of such social media services and probably much happier for it. It is a really, really watchable film. Jesse Eisenberg does a great job. How accurate, we'll discuss, but he does do a great job. And it's a really watchable film. It's very zippy. There is no fat on this film. There's no scenes where you think, oh, all right, we get it. Come on, move on. So thoroughly recommend it. You've got another week to watch it if you haven't before we get into the meat of it. And, we're going to try and be as non-judgmental as we possibly can be. Oh, that's true. I do have to go back to the lovely email by Matthew Newton, who came up with a new word. And he said he really enjoyed Frost Nixon Part 2, combining fact and entertainment. And then he suggested factainment. And I've got to be honest, I actually prefer that to infotainment, because info could just be telling you what time the bus is arriving or what tomorrow's weather's going to be. Whereas factainment sounds far more definitive. So thank you, Matthew. We will use that frequently, regularly, and probably without due credit to you until we remember, and then we'll say, that was the word made up by Matthew Newton. If it's not a word, it should be. Well, it is now. So we're going to head out now for this week, and that'll be it, apart from the Robinson Crusoe theme for those on YouTube. For the rest of you, we've got some different outro music, but you shouldn't read this as in any way a comment on how we see the CEO of Facebook or anyone else appearing in this movie at all, any way, shape or form. It's just a piece of music that I like. Okay, so thank you very much, dear listener, and we'll speak to you next week. Bye-bye.